at the top. Let's do a bit more here now. Alright, so this screw here is on the top of the release lever. You want that off and to recover its spring. Here we have a C-clip or E-clip holding this spring onto that lock lever shaft there. So we'll take that E-clip off, take its spring off. Back to the base of the camera. Let's get this stripped down. I want these screws out from the chrome surround. Usually they're not too much of a fight. Alright, just recover that and the screws. All 7 of them. Put those away to be cleaned. You can lift out the lock lever and lift out the release lever. The release lever has a spring on the base there, on this little tip, and I'm going to remove that very carefully so it doesn't get lost in the cleaning or bent. You can sort of wriggle that off that post. The tripod socket surround, that's quite commonly loose. Let's see what these screws are like. Well, that one's a bit corroded looking, but it came out easily enough. This mate's not bad. That one's not bad either. They were not exactly loose, neither were they particularly tight. Take our tripod socket off, and this little bush here, it just guides the position of your film cassette in the camera, and it does not need to go through the cleaner. The rewind button needs to come off next, and I've got a special pair of pliers for dealing with that. These pliers were made by cutting the ends off some needle nose pliers, nice cheap ones, nice soft steel, and then shoving this in the vise, centre popping between the jaws and running a drill bit down there deep enough and the right size to give me a good grip on that button. So holding the button, I'm just going to unscrew this, and this is exceptionally tight. I think it's probably locked in with a bit of corrosion there. I'm going to put a screwdriver blade down between the sprocket and the camera body so the sprocket can't turn. Yeah, and I was able to loosen that button from the bottom of the camera. I'll have a look at that. There's a little washer. The spring, which doesn't need to go through the cleaner, and the button. Again, the button is a little bit marked. Nothing wrong with that. Now the sprocket shaft, to get the sprocket shaft out, you've got to rotate this to expose the screw head here. And that small screw couples the shaft and the sprocket together. It's very much the same as the 2 screws that form the hinge pins for the front door. Right, so I've just popped that up. There's the shaft. There's our sprocket. The sprocket does not need to go through the ultrasonic cleaner. Now this fell out of the camera at the top. This is the Film Advance shaft bush. You see it's got a great gob of something here. I think that's just grease and dirt, nothing too exciting. And here's the clutch. Clutch is 3 pieces. The outer, the inner, and a spring which transfers the torque from one to the other. Camera back upside down. Let's get this rewind button lock here off. I'm going to unhook that spring so it's no longer under tension. That lever's job is to lock the rewind button up once you press it in until the Film Advance is moved. Once the Film Advance lever moves, it releases that and it goes back to its normal position. That spring, yeah, that's alright, it was just crossed over a bit. We'll get that little lever out from under there. That looks relatively flat. Sometimes they're not if they've been damaged. I'm not sure how people go about damaging them, but they do. There are 3 screws through here, visible through these holes, when you get them in the right position, that hold the mounting plate for the shutter release shaft to the camera body. The screws are loose, but not loose enough to have any real ill effect. Let's pull that shaft out. I'll recover my 3 screws. There's our shaft. Now while I've got this here, I need to check it. This plate can become loose on the shaft. I'm just checking to see if there's any noticeable movement. No, it feels good. If it's loose, what happens is that the plate can tilt relative to the shaft in a random fashion, and it means that the point at which your shutter release and the Film Advance release happen, which should happen at the same time in the travel of your shutter release, that can vary, and you may find that it'll release the Film Advance late or early in the cycle, but either way it causes you problems. Opening the back of the camera again, we can take out the take-up spool. That has a metal bush in the base of it, that's just loose in there. That's just brass, nickel plated. The nickel plating's always gone from the bottom. And the plastic take-up spool, I don't put that through the cleaner either. So the body's getting fairly well stripped down now. I think remove the shutter next. I've got a tool for removing the shutter retaining ring. It's this one here. Now on my web page I've got dimensions to help you with making something like that because they're not commercially available. They were once and they're not now. That's a bit tight on the thread. Probably dried grease, I would think. There's the shutter, there's the body, there's our retaining ring. Now here, that's a shim from the back of the shutter. We'll put that on there, and I'll put my retaining ring on the back of there loosely, because I want to come back and service that separately. Back to the camera body. This shroud can come off. There are 2 screws. They're chrome plated brass. They scratch very easily. If you've made a mess of one, Put it in this position at the bottom. Keep your pretty one at the top where people can see it. These two are in good condition, hence they haven't been butchered. So there's our shaft, the shroud and the two screws. This plate here, this serves to locate the shutter, stops it from rotating on the front of the camera. On a Retina 2C or 3C camera there'd be an arm attached at this point to control your rangefinder. This camera does not have a rangefinder, so there's nothing there to worry about. One of these two screws was loose, holding this plate to the inner helical. There's our plate. Here we have our focus scale ring, the black one. The gold coloured one here is the outer helical. This dull coloured one is the inner helical. And what I like to do is mark these for reassembly so I know exactly how things go. And everybody repairing cameras has their own way of doing this, but the way I do it is this. What I want to do is find the point in the motion where the inner and outer helical are on the same level. And as I swing this to my left here, you'll see that it lifts this off, it moves it. This is about the neutral point. This is where the two front surfaces are level with each other. At that point, what I normally do is take a rule or something else of that nature, and I scribe two lines across there at an angle to each other, creates a sort of a wedge shape. And on the opposite side of the shutter, I scribe a single line. Now I can find those markings later without too much trouble, and it means that I can put things back exactly where they came from. And that means that if the shutter and lens assembly were positioned so that the focus was correct before you disassembled it, providing you put everything back exactly where it came from, they will be completely accurately focused after you've finished disassembling, cleaning and reassembling things. So it's important to mark things so you know where they go. This already had a mark at this point, and that lines up on the inner helical and the outer helical at this point. But where is that in terms of anything else? Well, looking at this, it was probably at the infinity mark. But that's not how I like to do it, and that's too hard to easily judge where you've got things. So let's take off the focus scale ring. We have, 12 screws here. Okay, so we'll remove the black ring first, the outer ring. 4 flathead or countersunk screws hold the retainer ring. To the lens mount. Here's our retainer ring. These bright screws here, they hold the focus mount here to the front standard. These black screws here hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. So I'll remove the black screws. Now the arrangement of this is such that the heads of the black screws just come over the outer helical. Why they did that is one of life's mysteries. I'd say it's probably wasn't intended, but didn't really cause them any trouble in assembly, or they didn't want to change it because of all the extra work it would be entailed in fixing it. But I would have expected if those screws were further out, closer to the centre line there in fact, that then you could have lifted out this lot without any any interruption. We'll lift out the inner and outer helical. Now, because I chose to make 2 marks at the base and 1 mark at the top, I instantly know which way round this went. I won't be putting it back in the camera upside down, at least that's the hope. So I can unscrew these 2 components. They are very, very sticky. The camera body at this stage, we've got 4 screws here, nickel plated. These hold the focus mount in onto the front standard. These screws are loose. That means that the whole shutter assembly was potentially loose on the camera body. Not enough in this case to actually affect anything serious like the focus, but undesirable all the same. And this piece, this is our focus mount. Now that, I'm sure you can see that that's got great gobs of thick grease in there. Someone went crazy putting the grease in here. All that's going to have to be cleaned out. I'll clean that in my ultrasonic cleaner in wax and grease remover. I'll remove the bulk of that with a toothpick first, and I'll pull it out before I put that through the ammonia-based detergent cleaner, because that will strip the colour off the anodised. Back to the camera body. We're getting this a bit better stripped down now. Right, so this part needs to come out of the body. So we've got 2 screws top and bottom. These screws are normally quite tight. Very rare that they come out without any argument. Well, this one's going to, just to make a liar of me. And its mate. At the top of the camera, same deal. These ones at the top of the camera usually do come out without too much trouble. This screw is very mutilated looking. Someone's really gone to town on that. This screw holds the bracket that holds the transfer shaft in place. Might leave that in place. Slide this lot out. Okay, as you can see, there's a lot of sand and rubbish here and thick grease. Oh, there's any amount of terrible sand in this. So to dismantle this, push in the buttons, slide this back into the body, catch it on the other side, and don't let the buttons escape, because otherwise the springs will flick the buttons across the room and you'll lose the springs. Here's the button. Here's one spring. Here's the other button. Here's the other spring. While I was busy doing that, the sleeve came out. Here's the shroud. It's very filthy. It's full of sand. That'll need a lot of cleaning. And this piece, our front standard, has this piece on it. This is the finger for the shutter release. I'll unhook the return spring and remove the screw holding the return spring in place. That usually comes off as a piece. I don't put that through the cleaner. Here we have 2 screws, large head at the top, small head at the bottom. Early cameras of the 3C type had small screws at both ends, and a lot of cameras had a steel shim in here underneath, presumably to prevent scuffing of the aluminium. They did away with it with later cameras. Okay, so we can take that off there. That piece is off. Have we got anything left here? Yes, we've got to get this screw out here that holds in the shaft. One screw, it's short, it's unlike anything else on the camera. Shaft comes out, There's our transfer shaft, and there's the bracket that we just took the screw out of. It holds this in position. And there's our camera body, all stripped down. It's going to need a fair bit of cleaning. I'm looking at the state of the leatherettes. I dislike removing leatherettes from the front of these cameras, but if there's corrosion under there, sometimes it's the only answer. In this case, that leatherette's loose. Means I'm going to have to get that off there. Those cracking sounds, that's the adhesive giving way, and it's because there's corrosion under there, and the corrosion has effectively forced the adhesive and the leatherette and the body to part company. You can see all that filth on there, that's all corrosion products. Same on here, it's probably aluminium salts of some sort, I would think. If it's bad on one side, it's probably bad on the other. This is certainly stuck firmer on this side. You probably got away with leaving the leatherette attached here, but since I'm servicing the entire camera, I need to do a real good job of it. Set this thing up for the next half a dozen decades. Right, that's that off. The leatherette on the back, again, I would normally choose to leave that in place, even if I saw bumps like that, if there was no other problem. But there is another problem. The leatherette is obviously peeling up here. So I'm going to have to lift that leatherette off, clear the corrosion from the back of it, and glue this back down. You can see that that's... Some of this is stuck very well, some of it's not stuck at all. Well, as you can see, that's just about falling away. But you have to proceed pretty slowly, very carefully. And if there are no bumps on the back of the camera, you know, leave it alone. Leatherette is always going to be more firmly stuck on a sharp corner like this. So when you get to a corner like that, you need to proceed with great caution. The leatherette's probably stuck fairly well around there, and you don't want to crack the leatherette. If it's going to crack, that's where it'll crack. Here I'm using the scalpel as a lever, and I'm gently levering that leatherette off, and you can see there's a fair bit of rubbish there. And all of this stuff, this bright stuff on the back there, that's corrosion products. I want all of that off. At this stage I've got a pile of stuff that needs to be cleaned up. This stuff for the ultrasonic cleaner, this stuff to be cleaned by hand, these to be cleaned by hand, then the ultrasonic cleaner, leatherettes to be cleaned by hand, camera body to be cleaned by hand, and of course we've got the pieces that have to be cleaned by hand here that weren't to go through the cleaner, the top cover with the viewfinder assembly to be done by hand, the meter which is dead but may come back to life, and our shutter assembly. But this is stage one.